And welcome back to the channel without the catchphrase. Everything is interesting. And today, the final episode with the letter A, where A is for animals, accents, and absurdity. As always, if you have an idea for a topic, this time with the letter B, then please write to me at everythingisveryinteresting@gmail.com and you may get this piece of paper in the mail. So let's talk about the final A's, shall we? About animals and accents. Let's start about accents, because I could talk a lot about accents. Just the British accents that I know could be fun. We talked a little bit about Cockney as an accent and also in argot and all this kind of stuff. But what I actually want to do is talk about both animals and accents, because it turns out that animals have accents. Yes, they do. Animals in the wild develop accents. Because, of course, animals make noises as well, all kinds of noises. If you listen, you can hear the birds. Of course, the moment I stop talking, the birds stop singing. But there are birds outside my window, and they are singing with a particular cadence and speed and chirpiness. And this chirpiness is specific to the area that I live in. Because how do birds learn to sing? It is not inbuilt behavior, actually. Birds learn to sing by listening to other birds. They sort of copy the birds. It's all very tick-tocky, and they sort of mimic their artist peers, and there are some birds that sing really cool, and all the young birds want to sound like that bird and stuff. So they do learn from each other, but they don't learn perfectly from each other. Sometimes the birds mess up the way they sing. So slowly but surely, the ways that birds sing change, which means that birds' song like 100 years ago is different from birds' song today, just like the way people speak. Human language is different now than it was 100 years ago. If you see really old movies, you can hear that in English they speak in a sort of strange, very sort of odd, old-fashioned way, don't they? And that's not because everybody was crazy back then, it's simply because that's how English sounded then. And if we somehow were able to go 100 years ahead of time and play movies from today for people then, it would sound incredibly old-fashioned to them too. I would sound old-fashioned. Some people say I already do sound old-fashioned, to which I say, get off my lawn, please. Get off my lawn. So, animals have the same thing, which is kind of interesting, because we do tend, as humans, to consider that kind of stuff to be sort of uniquely human. I think, if you don't think about it, it seems weird to us that there should be any other species of animal that had accents, but yes, they do. Also, regional accents. Again, for the same reason, because birds learn their song from other birds, and they don't learn it perfectly well, it also drifts over distance. So you can have the same species of bird in different areas of a country, or a zone, or whatever, and they will have different accents. You can recognize, like if you're a real massive bird nerd, if such a thing exists, and I'm sure they do, people who like really, really know birds very, very well, they would be able to recognize, oh, that thrush is from the Baltic, they would say. And I would be very impressed, and of course they could just make that up, because I wouldn't be able to know if it was from the Baltic at all. I don't even know if thrushes live in the Baltic. I hardly know what a thrush is. Is it a bird? I think it's a bird. Anyway, as you can probably tell, I'm not an ornithologist, but it is possible to do this kind of thing, and it's not limited to birds. Any animal that makes a sound actually does have accents, especially if they learn it. Sometimes it's not learned from each other. Sometimes it's evolutionarily decided. For instance, bats. Bats are affected by what they want to catch. You know, their food is flowing around in a cave and it's dark. So the bats have this cool method of sort of shouting at the walls until they can see something. It's actually quite a strange life to be a bat when you think about it. Because, of course, you know bats use echolocation, right? They sort of go boop, and they wait for the echo of their boop to come back into their ears, and based on the echo they can figure out how far away they are from the wall and from any delicious food flying around in front of them. Yes, that's how bats work. Now, if you imagine that for just a brief moment in time, please imagine if that's how humans did it. You know, like people were just walking around with their eyes closed, going ah, ah, and just yelling at the walls, and then saying, the door is here. Yes. Ah! Oh, thank you. Hello. And meeting people based on like shouting in their face. It would be a strange situation, but you know that's what bats do. Okay, they're actually very good at it. I used to have a bat in my garden when I was a kid, and I used to play with it. Not in the... I'm not sure the bat understood it was being played with, to be honest, but it felt like I was playing with it. And what I used to do was I would throw like a ball or something up close to the bat, and the bat would chase it because the bat was going, "Ah!" And then it would hear that there was something nearby and would chase it for a bit to see what it was. And then it would just stop chasing it when it realised it wasn't a delicious, I don't know, fly, whatever they eat. The moment they discovered that, it would sort of veer off. But it would keep doing it because it was not a very smart bat. I'm not sure if bats in general are stupid or if it's just my bat, but my bat was an idiot. And it just kept falling for the same trick over and over again. And to a little boy like me, that was fun. So that was me and the bat. Anyway, the point is that they can evolve different accents because different bats want to catch different kinds of food. And different kinds of food apparently have different sort of auditory signals, signatures, kind of thing. So that if you want to catch a particular fat kind of fly, you have to shout at it in a particular way to hear it properly, or to hear its echo properly. And thus, different bats, even though they're the same species, if they are living in areas with different prey, they will have different accents. So today you learned that animals have accents. Whales absolutely do. They have very different accents, which is really super duper cool, if you ask me. So yes, that is really all I wanted to say about accents, but certainly not all I wanted to say about animals. We are going to return to the topic of animals, but not quite yet. I want to talk about absurdities. Absurdities are fun. If you're not aware of what absurdities are is basically usually used as a humorous thing about pointing out ridiculous parts of life in some sense. Talking about life being weird and odd and making people laugh about that, I suppose. I will mention two stories quickly because I don't have all that much time. Two stories which delve into the absurd. And we can talk about them, and there are, of course, something interesting about them. You may not know them. The first one is a story called The Wasps. And the plot of The Wasps is quite weird, of course, because it's an absurdist story, and I don't know it too well. But the story is basically we have two people who are holding guard of a locked down house. And the house is locked down because inside there is a dangerous man, but he's being held back for his own good. Because he's addicted. And we are asked, in a sense, to guess what he's addicted to. And is he addicted to gambling? Is he addicted to drugs or whatever? The fact is, no, he is not. He is addicted, it turns out, to being a jury member. He loves being in court and getting to decide if people go to prison and stuff. He can't get enough of this. And he's so addicted to it that he has to be locked in for his own safety so that he doesn't constantly try to get on the jury. And that's basically the setup of this comedy. And the comedy gets very absurd because it ends up with they sort of try to teach him how to behave by setting up a lawsuit between two dogs, because there is a dog that has stolen the cheese, and there's another dog which is being blamed somehow. There's a lawsuit set up, and all the witnesses are inanimate objects like bowls and stuff, and also puppies are brought in to appeal to the sense, to the feelings of the jury. You bring in the defendant's children and all that kind of stuff. So basically, it's a big, massive satire on the legal system, which is completely absurd and ridiculous. And the way that works so well is that it points out the problems of the jury system at the time in a way which is also entertaining and funny. And that is why absurdism sort of wins quite often. Now, the reason you probably haven't heard of this show, The Wasps, it is a show. It's actually a play. It's not a movie because movies weren't invented back then. It's actually an incredibly old play from more than 2,000 years ago, written by a guy called Aristophanes, who is the great comedic writer of ancient Greece. And to me, that's quite surprising. It doesn't seem like a joke, which is 2,500 years old to me. It sounds like a setup to a sitcom. It sounds maybe a little bit lame, but it sounds kind of fun as well. I would have not, had I not known this to begin with, I would have been quite surprised that it was that old, because jokes usually age really badly. But yes, there's an insanely old story about about that, and that's called The Wasp. There's another story. What's it called? I've forgotten. It's no fun if I can't remember what it's called, to be honest. That's embarrassing. It's a film. This one is a film. It's made by Buñuel, who's one of these great absurdist filmmakers. Something with the angel. Oh, I can't remember now. I don't want to talk about it if I don't remember it. So, sorry, I am completely skipping over it now. You're going to have to look up Luis Buñuel. He's famous for The Andalusian Dog, which is a film. It's a very surrealistic film, and it has very memorable imagery, which I really don't want to repeat because it's quite nightmarish. I remember seeing it as a kid, and it's quite disturbing, but it certainly is memorable. So I'll just let you look that up for yourself if you are curious about how a filmmaker from the early 50s could mess up my brain as a kid, because he's certainly good. So what is absurdism in general? Like the surrealism. I feel like I want to mention something which I think is interesting about art in general. Now, I'm going to talk about art while making art, which is very meta, but the idea is something that has been mentioned by Brian Eno. Now, Brian Eno is a musician, or a sound artist, really. His most famous work, by the way, you probably know. It is reproduced in incredibly many copies. It's internationally well recognized immediately. It's undeniably Brian Eno's greatest hit. Well, not a hit because people don't really play it on purpose; they just hear it. It's the Windows XP opening sound, the doom ba doom 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 thing that it does. No, that's the closing one. Oh, you know what I mean, exactly what I mean. That sort of opening salvo of sound that comes when you start up Windows XP. That's Brian Eno who made that. He was paid a bunch of money by Microsoft to sort of make this really inspirational thing. And Brian Eno has described how he was given this massive list of all the things this jingle had to sort of represent. It had to sort of represent like hope and joy and opportunity and justice and all kinds of weird and stuff. And they were told it must not last more than 3 seconds or something. So yeah, that was Brian Eno. Anyway, Brian Eno says something deep and important about art, I think. He says that, especially in music, he mentions it, that there is something exciting when it gets ugly. Because, like the distorted guitar, a distorted guitar is originally simply just a normal electric guitar where you've turned up the sound too far, the volume too much, and the loudspeaker can't keep up. But it becomes a sound in its own right. It becomes like the sound of the distorted guitar becomes like completely iconic in popular music because of this, because it sounds exciting. And his point is that there's something exciting when the passion of the expression becomes so deep that the medium can't contain it. You know, like it's like when you watch video and it's like kind of glitchy or black and white or sort of badly VHS kind of quality. It's like, oh yeah, you know, this is so important that the medium itself is kind of breaking apart, just trying to keep this momentous piece of art inside itself. And Brian Eno says that this is, as soon as you can avoid the problems with your medium, it becomes attractive to add in by mistake. And we see this all the time, like how video adds in all kinds of fake bad quality to make it look cool, right? And there's something attractive to that. Now, why do I mention this now? Because surreal comedy is kind of the literary equivalent of that, I think. It's something like that, you know, as soon as you can avoid being nonsensical, there's something exciting about losing sense. Like the story becomes so wild that it can't keep itself within reality, you know? I think that's part of the appeal, that it just becomes so ridiculous. I know that it has appeal, because if you look at how art tends to develop, it tends to develop in that direction, that meaning becomes less important as the medium progresses. We see this in postmodernism, as I mentioned, these strange movies by Buñuel with with the strange acts and in this movie there's like a bear and two sheep that are suddenly gotten eaten and people, it's just weird shit that doesn't have to happen. But I don't have to go into weird art history to convince you of this, because if you look at the internet right now, it's happening again. We have memes which are undoubtedly the art form of the internet. This is the expression form of the internet. Like, anybody who's on the internet for any amount of time knows that memes exist, and they have all kinds of little subgenres and ways to express. But what you see is that meaning is sort of leaking out of memes, because it's fun, it's exciting, it's somehow weird and exciting to just break apart the whole concept of a meme. And you have the dank memes, which are relatively new, in 2020 at least, and a lot of dank memes are just there to be weird. They don't necessarily need to mean anything. It's basically because surrealism in itself, absurdism in itself, is a goal. Let me take an example. Let me take an example first of a meme that does have a meaning, right? We have, like, the Chuck Norris meme. That's an ancient meme, but the ancient meme of Chuck Norris being, like, incredibly overpowered, and everything he does is like, super crazy. And there's lots of memes about that, right? I don't need to mention them. There's nothing more lame than reciting a meme. I am running out of pens, like nobody's business. Okay, let's see. Yes. But so there's meaning in the Chuck Norris meme, right? But if you look at the dank memes, some of them just don't mean anything, and I'm not afraid of saying that now. I've tried to figure out what the E meme means, and it doesn't mean anything. Nobody knows what it means, at least. Now, if you don't know what the E meme is, it is a picture of, well, originally it's a picture of Mark Zuckerberg, the guy from Facebook, who was at the testimony hearings, but they've changed the face, so it's shaped like Farquaad from Shrek, and on top of that, they've added the face of Markiplier, the YouTuber. And the whole picture is like completely distorted, and then they've just added the letter E to the bottom of the meme. That's it. You'll find this meme online, and it literally means nothing, but it is exactly what Brian Eno is saying. It's just like this meme is so exciting, it's completely broken the mold of everything, including meaning, and it's become postmodern. And my point is that this might seem all new and edgy to people who are familiar with internet culture, but this shit's been going on for like 2,500 years, okay? The thing about breaking apart conventions and making them different because it's like shocking and edgy, dank memes are not the first to do that, like, at all. Right, okay, enough about this. I want to talk about actual absurdities, real absurd facts, starting with A, to end out this letter sequence. Starting off with Alice in Wonderland, of course, being the natural bridge here. Alice in Wonderland being a classic surrealistic tale written by Lewis Carroll in a clear attempt to be surreal. But there is something called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which is a thing that you can actually feel like you are in Alice in Wonderland, in the sense that you can feel suddenly much bigger than you are, or much smaller than you are, or much closer to things than you are, much further away from things than you are. And that's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And actually, most people have probably experienced this a few times in their life. There's nothing pathological or dangerous about it. You can, if you have serious migraines and things, you may have it more often, but most people actually have experienced Alice in Wonderland syndrome, usually when they're falling asleep, or waking up, but usually falling asleep. And I'm going to describe what it feels like because I think you might know. When you're falling asleep, sometimes you might get this sense that everything is right next to your face, for instance. That's what I get, at least. That everything sort of seems like it's very, very close to you. You may get the opposite feeling, that you feel that everything's very far away from you. And it's a quite weird and settling experience, but you usually feel it as you are falling asleep, so you kind of forget that you had it. But I think you probably have experienced it. I'm saying this hoping that I'm right. No, I am right, because the research points to it being sleep onset induced, but I'm not sure how prevalent it is, but I feel it sometimes, And it's kind of weird and slightly unsettling, but it is. So that's Alice in Wonderland syndrome. The first absurd little fact of the day is that your brain can sometimes tell you that you're much bigger than you are. And that's weird, because of course you're not bigger than you are. But in fact, some people think that Lewis Carroll, the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland, because he was a druggie, was affected by Alice in Wonderland syndrome. So ironically, he may have named the syndrome via his own book. But he may have been inspired by these feelings of being larger and smaller, based on his experiences with opium and laudanum and stuff like that, which he was playing with. Okay, let's talk about another animal and another absurdist fact, beginning with A. Operation Acoustic Kitty. Oh yes, Operation Acoustic Kitty. The CIA had a great plan one day. I'll tell you exactly what the plan was. The plan was that they wanted to spy on the Russians. Now, this is not anything new. The CIA doesn't want to do anything else, basically, than spy on people. So they wanted to spy on the Russians. But how did they want to do this? Well, they took a cat. Yes, a cat, a real one, with ears and a tail and all that. They took a real cat and they implanted a microphone in its ears, like surgically, and like a transmitter somewhere inside its gut or something. And like they really spent a lot of cash with miniaturized equipment, like an incredibly expensive thing. This is like in the 70s, where miniaturized stuff is really expensive. And they turned this cat basically into a listening station. And it was still fine, of course. Then they released the cat near some Russians in, I don't know how and when and why, but they did. So hoping that the cat would just like be a cat and just chill next to the Russians, and then letting them hear what the Russians were saying. Because fair enough, if I was a Russian meanie pants and the only person close to me is a cat, and I haven't read Harry Potter and I don't suspect it to be McGonagall, I probably will not keep my secrets all that close to me. I mean, you would have to be quite paranoid, right, to be a Russian spy and be like, oh, we cannot speak about the secrets because there's a cat. I am speaking with a French accent for some reason. I am such a good Russian spy that I am not even Russian. Yeah, you can't just say, like, we better be quiet because the cat might hear us. So that's a great plan, right? No. Because what happened was, and anybody who knows cats will not be surprised, the cat got hungry and pissed off and ran onto the road and got killed by a taxi. Like within 5 minutes of the Operation Acoustic Kitty beginning. Which is, of course, very sad for the cat, but also quite sad for the CIA, who had left like $20 million worth of equipment in this cat. And the taxi was just like, oh, I'm so sorry, that's a shame. I'm sorry for hitting the cat. Things happen. The CIA is just like, oh, if only you knew. And they can't really prosecute him. It's not like they can bring him in on trial and say, like, you destroyed $20 million worth of CIA equipment inside this cat. That's really not anything you could win. But you might have the guy from the Wasps, the guy who's addicted to trials. He might be into that trial. Who knows? But that was Operation Acoustic Kitty, sorry. Speaking of squirrels, though, squirrels were arrested in Iran recently for being spies. Yes, a group of 14 squirrels were arrested by the Iranian military close to a nuclear facility because they claim, at least the Iranians claim, that they had been fitted with GPS and other kinds of stuff, so that some nefarious government could keep an eye on what the Iranians were doing in their government secrecy places with their nuclear stuff. So the Iranians arrested the squirrels. And the funny thing is, the word arrested is used in all like official documents. And when you look at this stuff up online, you find the news, and they just all say, the squirrels were arrested. Like, I feel like the word arrested, I feel like you can't really arrest a squirrel. Can you? Does that make sense? I mean, is it possible to arrest a squirrel? I feel like you can't arrest a squirrel. You could catch it and, like, make sure it doesn't spy on you, but you don't arrest it. Arrest it seems like it has, like, legal rights. Does it? It doesn't, does it? No, it doesn't. I can't arrest a squirrel. I'm sure I can't. Speaking of squirrels, though, they maybe should be arrested, because it turns out, absurdly, that squirrels are more likely to cause power outages than terrorists. Because one of the big risks, one of the big sort of threats we stand in today is that the power goes out. We are incredibly dependent on electricity in today's society, because not only do we need lights and stuff, to power our stoves and fridges and all these kind of things, but also communication is completely dependent on power. we need a power supply to power our phones, to power the antennas that run the 5G network, etc., etc., etc. If power goes down, society goes down. So this is like a big existential terror threat that some evil terrorist organization is going to cut out the electricity. Turns out the biggest terrorist organization in the world, by that standard, are squirrels. They have broken electric system so many times it's not even funny. In the US, they have broken the electric power supply at least once in every single state of the US. Squirrels. Except in Hawaii, because there are no squirrels in Hawaii, but chickens have done it in Hawaii, so they're in on it too. But the fact is, they just go into the the power lines and they just chew on the cables until they destroy the internet. Not the internet, but the powers. And it's happened quite a lot. And it's not only in the US, it's also happened in Germany. A huge part of a city was completely blacked out for over an hour because a squirrel, which was described in German as a pelziger Selbstmordattentäter, which means a furry suicide bomber, went into some high voltage thing, chewed the power cables off, obviously, killed itself with this massive shock, but not before it completely destroyed the entire power. So look out for squirrels. Not only are they arrestable by the Iranian government for spying on nuclear facilities, but they will also destroy your society if you let them. So goddamn squirrels, they should be looked upon with a skeptical eye, I say. What else has happened which has something to do with animals that starts with A? Oh yes, airlines. Singapore Airlines was transporting animals one day in an aeroplane, of course, and suddenly the smoke alarm goes off. And that's a huge problem, of course, because if the smoke alarm goes off, there's no smoke without fire. There's a fire in an aircraft, that's the most dangerous thing in the world, and there is absolutely clear rules for what they have to do. If the smoke alarm goes off, you have to land the plane in the nearest possible airport, put out the fire, make sure that it's all sorted out. Extremely expensive thing to have happen. If you divert a plane, it costs like thousands upon thousands of dollars to deal with that. It's just what happens. This is why you should never smoke on an airplane, because if you smoke in an airplane toilet, they will have to re-divert the plane and you will be paying all those countless oodles of thousands of dollars for the redirection, and that is not a good idea. So anyway, don't do that. So they land the plane and see where the fire is. There is no fire. It turns out that there is lots of sheep in this plane. They've been transported by air for reasons I really can't figure out why. I don't know why anybody would possibly want to transport sheep by air, but whatever, they were. And these sheep were in the cargo hold, and they were farting so much that the methane levels of the cargo hold triggered the smoke alarm. So the sheep farted the airplane out of the sky. So not only are squirrels terrorists, but sheep are disruptive to the air traffic of this world. What else can we talk about? Well, I have 2 minutes left, so let's see how much far I can get. I can tell you about the Australian Prime Minister who was killed by Australia. That's an interesting one. In the 60s, an Australian Prime Minister discovered that his country was, as everybody knows, is famous for wanting to murder you as soon as you go outside. That's what Australia does. It's a very nice place, but everything wants to kill you. And he went outside and went swimming in the sea, and the sea just ate him, and he disappeared. Nobody ever saw him again, and that's kind of awkward, because, you kind of need your Prime Minister to be around, and suddenly he just wasn't there anymore. And, so he died, and conspiracy theories abounded that he'd been abducted by a Chinese submarine, which I feel like would be really cool. Of course, that's not what happened. I mean, Jesus. Obviously, he was just unlucky enough to be Prime Minister of the deadliest country on Earth, and he died from it. But that's still strange, right? A Prime Minister who just vanishes, what do you do? Like, you can't just immediately declare him dead, because what if he's just, swimming? you can't just say, oh, he's dead, sorry, there's a new Prime Minister, and he comes out and goes, that was a good swim. Wait, what's going on? And suddenly he's not Prime Minister anymore. You have this weird time where nobody is Prime Minister, which isn't great. Finally, I think I will simply mention that Neil Armstrong, upon returning from the moon, filled in a customs form, because it was a joke. It's an absurdist joke. We're back to the absurdism again. But the absurdist joke was that he filled out a form that is usually used for when you arrive into the US from a foreign country, and he declared the moon rocks on the customs form. And you can find that customs form. It's quite sweet. It's typed out Country of origin, moon. Cargo, moon rocks, that kind of thing. So that's pretty fun. So I'm going to end this episode with just telling you that I'm going to read something to you, a little bedtime story, in the bonus episode. Bye.